Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jung Dae-kyun. I'm president of KDI. It's an honor to chair this closing session. She has already introduced participants of this discussion panel, so I don't want to introduce along our history of these participants, but just a name as from my far right, Professor Lee Hyo-soo from Yeongnam University, and Professor Thomas Kokan. You have just heard his excellent address, and Dr. Peter Plimpton-Smith from UNESCO, my left, and then my far left is Professor Gary Gabriele. This is, as you know, is a closing session, and so maybe the intention is to summarize the 3 days discussion. But we have two good speakers today, Professor Barrow and Professor Kokan. So maybe I don't think we may not need this closing or summarizing effort, but since we have very excellent experts here, maybe we will try to summing up some highlight of the 3-day seminar. Professor Kokan highlighted various challenges to be faced in transitional process to become a knowledge-based economy. I think his point is that we need some comprehensive or combined effort from education or government, business. So I think the key point is that comprehensive work. But for the sake of discussion, we want to divide some elements by elements and try to make it that key features in these elements. So in this discussion session, I want to first talk about these 3 key areas: education and business and government. And for the remainder of time, maybe touched upon the other issues. And I'd like to ask each participant when they talk about a specific topic, be very brief and maybe not exceeding 4 minutes for each topic, and bring to the key points. So first, I want to talk about this education. In today's, even today's closing address, Professor Vero emphasized this importance of education, and Dr. Kokan also emphasized of this education. But I want to call first Dr. Smith from UNESCO that how, after this 3-day seminar, what do you think is the key findings, and what is the we should focus for improving the education system?
Thank you very much. There are 5 points that I would like to make, and I will list them and then develop each very briefly within 4 minutes. Number 1, conflict is expensive. Conflict is expensive. Number 2, if we focus on people, growth will follow. Focusing on growth without focusing on people is too short term. Number 3, in the external society, understanding and compensating for lifelong learning is critical. Learning how to do it is critical. 4th, in schools, we must organize schools so that they put learning first. Organize schools for learning, not for teaching. And 5th, learn to cooperate, the point that Dr. Kokan closed with examples in industry, examples in the service sector. And the question for education is, can we learn how to operate cooperatively with other agencies to put learning first and to achieve all of these other objectives? To go back through them, Whether you are in a home setting or a work setting or a community setting or a global setting in which conflict is war, there is nothing more expensive than conflict. One, because it puts your resources into the support of a negative, and two, because it takes you away from the positive. So at any level, conflict is expensive. Secondly, I think there is a false dichotomy between the concept of growth versus concept of what is good for people or redistribution within a society. We know, and to put it forward, that in more developed countries in schools, we now see in the UNESCO's data a steady trend that the more developed the country, the better women do in secondary school, and the problems that are now emerging are with young men staying in school and being productive. But we know behind that, if we focus on people, it is not this simple, and I understand that, and then have good economic and investment policies, growth will follow. But without the focus on people, without the development of a middle class and societal stability, it will be extremely difficult to sustain prosperity and growth. Third, in the community and with lifelong learning, we must focus on breaking down the barriers between work and learning. Make the workplace a place of learning through assessment of learning that happens outside of school, through bringing the ability to reflect on what you have learned so that you extract meaning from your experience and to use it and reward it in the workplace. To make the learning you do within the workplace or within a country portable to other workplaces, to school, or to other countries. These are barriers that must be breached. Putting learning first, adopting teaching to promote learning, using cognitive science, using what we know about learning style to reform curriculum, whatever the modality of delivery, ICTs or people or combinations. We know enough now to organize curriculum so that it meets the intellectual, cognitive, style strengths of learners so that more people learn to high standards. To fail to do that is the equivalent of knowing that you have someone with diabetes, you know how to treat diabetes, but in fact you go ahead and tell them that there's nothing you can do for them, they should just be healthy. We know enough, we should act on it. Put learning first.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, for your brief, points about education. Among this education, I think engineering study is very important in foreign countries as well as in Korea. I understand Dr. Gabriel has a lot of experience in engineering education. What is your point on engineering education?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll try to keep my comments on engineering education around three main points that have actually were the major emphasis of our session, but also of sessions throughout this meeting. The first is that we do need new curricula in engineering, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And we need new ways of teaching that support those curricula. And then to make those changes, we also need research that tells us how to accomplish that. In new curricula, we need to be focused more on creativity, innovation, and multidisciplinary thinking. This has not always been the tradition of engineering education. Engineering education has been good at providing a good fundamental science and engineering background for our students, and it has also been good at bringing in new technologies as they have emerged and integrate those into the curriculum. But in the areas of creativity and innovation and multidisciplinary thinking, we are often challenged. In fact, we probably find that our students are less creative when they graduate than when they enter the engineering program. We tend to have a way to beat it out of them. And we need to look at new ways to do that. And our leading universities, engineering institutions in the States, have been known for keeping creativity within their curriculum and trying to celebrate it. And I think that's a challenge that all engineering curriculums face because, again, as we talked about many times here, and I think Dr. Cochran said this as well in his talk, is that there's going to be value. The value of engineers will be in their ability to create and be innovative. So our curriculums need to move in that direction. And to do that, we do need new ways of teaching that are more student-centered. These new curriculums that require creativity, innovation, and multidisciplinary thinking require a different kind of teaching and a different kind of pedagogy. Lecture, which is now our main mode of teaching in most universities, which is a teacher-centered activity, must move to more active engagement of students in the learning process and more student-centered teaching methods. There are many universities in the States that have experimented with these to good success, but these require some substantial changes in how we teach. And it requires faculty to relearn and to learn to give up control. But in the end, our students, I think, will have the fundamentals that they need to be successful. They will have taken more responsibility for their learning, and they will have learned the fundamentals of lifelong learning as well. Often, though, to make these changes, it is difficult, as those of us in academia know. There's a saying that it's often easier to move a cemetery than it is to change a curriculum. And so how to perform these changes, how to define how these changes will be made opens up the opportunity for new research and how students learn, which is one of the areas, I think, that academia has not directed its attention to in sufficient depth, particularly in engineering. We have tried many things, many reforms, without really studying them in depth as we do often in our own technical areas. So the challenge here really is to really try to understand how students learn engineering in order to provide us the information we need to make the really transformative kinds of changes in engineering education that need to be done. All of these will challenge also the very structures of our university. Multidisciplinary teaching will challenge our disciplinary structures that we currently have in our universities. It will require faculty to move between departments and move across boundaries that right now are fairly rigid. It will require different kinds of teaching systems, a different kind of culture. As we move to more computing within our curriculums and we move to more student-centered activities, everything within our university becomes challenged, from our classrooms to the dorms that our students live in. All of those are potential learning spaces, but right now they are set up on an old paradigm, and they need to be revisited and challenged and rethought. Again, as Dr. Smith said, I think the focus needs to be on learning, and I think that's where the future will be for engineering education. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gabriel. Speaking of education, I think most of the audience here want to know about the Korean education system, and then we have seen the question was addressed to Professor Barrow, and also Dr. Cochran mentioned about Korean education. Yeah. It may take hours, maybe days and months to discuss the whole Korean education system, but since we have one Korean professor here, I want to ask Professor Lee, I think, to tell the key points in this seminar about the Korean education in 3 minutes. He can make a miracle.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will speak in English. Please use interpreter. 우리나라의 교육이 한국의 여기 통역기 하나 해주세요. 한국에 있어서 교육이 경제 성장에 어떻게 기여를 했느냐 하는 부분은 적어도 한국이 지난 40년간의 압축 성장을 시연해 오는 데 있어서 교육은 결정적인 기여를 했다고 볼 수가 있습니다. 그것은 당시에 우리의 산업경제 체제 또는 대량 생산 체제 하에서 우리가 그 직무가 대단히 표준화되어 있었기 때문에 표준화되어 있는 직무에 적합한 인재는 정형화된 인재입니다. 그런데 한국이 지금까지 가져왔던 교육 방법은 정형화된 인재를 길러내는 데는 대단히 효율적인 교육 방식을 가지고 있었습니다. 그렇기 때문에 한국의 교육이 한국의 경제 성장을 일으키는데 대단히 중요한 역할을 했고, 이것은 적어도 산업사회에 있어서는 한국이 세계적인 모델이라고도 볼 수 있습니다. 문제는 한국이 이제 지식 기반 경제로 이행해야 된다는 것입니다. 그런데 지식 기반 경제의 직무 성격이 산업사회의 직무 성격하고 대단히 다릅니다. 그러니까 대량 생산 체제의 직무는 표준화되어 있지만은 이게 유연 생산 체제, 지식 기반 경제에서는 유연 생산 체제가 필요하고, 유연 생산 체제의 직무는 날로 바뀌는, 끊임없이 바뀌는 과정에 놓여 있는 성격을 지니고 있습니다. 따라서 여기에 대응할 수 있는 인재의 육성이 필요한데, 현재 우리나라의 중고등 대학의 모든 교육 시스템은 여기에 대응할 수 있는 인재 육성 시스템을 확보하고 있지 못하다는 데 큰 문제가 있습니다. 그런 의미에서 인재 육성 시스템의 패러다임의 전환이 필요합니다. 즉 말하자면 산업사회에서 우리에게 필요한 인재가 정형화된 인재였다면 지식 기반 경제에 필요한 인재는 지식 근로자입니다. 그러면 지식 근로자가 뭐냐? 그것은 지식과 정보를 수집, 분석, 가공해서 새로운 지식과 정보를 창출할 수 있는 능력을 가진 자를 말합니다. 현재 우리의 교육이 이러한 지식 근로자를 양성하는 데 적합한가 하는 것을 우리가 깊이 고민해야 합니다. 그러면 이러한 지식 근로자를 기르기 위해서 우리 인적 자원의 가장 중요한 자원적 요소가 무엇인가를 생각해야 됩니다. 그것은 우리 인간이 모두가 가지고 있는 학습 마인드, 창조 마인드, 협력 마인드입니다. 이 학습, 창조, 협력 마인드를 어떻게 극대화시킬 것인가 하는 것입니다. 그것을 위해서 우리는 티칭 중심의 교육, 인재 육성 패러다임을 바꿔야 되는 이유가 거기에 있습니다. 그래서 우리가 러닝 중심의 패러다임으로 바꿔야 한다는 것입니다. 그래서 학습, 창조, 협력 마인드를 극대화시켜야 하는데, 그러면은 이것을 우리가 어떻게 해야 할 것인가 하는 것입니다. 우리는 두 가지의 과제를 안고 있습니다. 하나는 현재 우리의 대학 시스템으로서는 글로벌 탤런트를 길러내기가 힘듭니다. 그것은 우리나라 대학이 유효 경쟁 체제가 확립되어 있지 않기 때문에 그렇습니다. 현재 우리나라 대학은 사립대학과 국립대학 간의 경쟁 체제가 무너져 있고, 수도권 대학과 지방대학 간의 경쟁 체제가 무너져 있기 때문에 실질적인 유효 경쟁 체제가 확립되어 있지 않습니다. 이것이 우리나라의 대학의 질을 올리는 데 대단히 큰 문제가 있습니다. 그리고 우리나라의 노동시장과 교육시장이 정보의 비대칭성이 너무나 큽니다. 그렇기 때문에 대학에서 양질의 교육이 지금 공급되고 있지 않는 상태에 우리는 놓여 있습니다. 이런 의미에서 유효 경쟁 체제의 확보와 노동시장과 교육시장의 정보망의 확보가 절대적으로 지금 필요하다고 볼 수 있습니다. 또한 우리가 글로벌 탤런트를 길러내는 데 있어서 이 의학 능력이라든지 이런 것이 대단히 중요한데, 이것을 대학에서 기르겠다고 하면은 잘못된 것이라고 봅니다. 따라서 우리가 중고등학교 단계에서부터 우리가 글로벌 탤런트를 어떻게 기를 것인가를 우리는 고민을 해야 될 것입니다. 그런 의미에서 우리의 인재 육성 방법은 수직적인, 대학과 중고등학교 간의 수직적인 조화의 관계의 형성, 그리고 대학과 산업계 간에 있어서의 산학협력에 있어서의 수평적 관계의 형성, 이 부분에 있어서의 새로운 전략적 네트워크의 형성이 우리에게 필요하다, 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 네, 시간 제약이 있기 때문에 다음 부분에서 좀 구체적으로 이야기를 하도록 하겠습니다.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lee. I want to move on to the second key player. So I mean that the role is business. I'm moving from education, from business. We need maybe we need a lot of time if we talk about a business aspect. But among other things, I want to touch upon the relation between business and universities, and maybe if time allows, and labor management relations. So I'd like to ask Professor Gabriel, who has done work experience and academic experience, so how we can cope with this university and business relation.
Well, I think the experience that I can best talk about is the experience of the National Science Foundation in the U.S. and how it fosters this collaboration between industry and universities, particularly in the areas of science research and engineering research. It has for many years, in cases of engineering research centers, over 20 years of experience in bringing universities and industry together in two different models. One is called the Industry University Cooperative Research Centers, where the emphasis is more on direct application to industry needs. And then the other model is the NSF Engineering Research Center, where the emphasis is more on moving the state of the art, and so the emphasis is mostly on the research, with the idea that in the end it must have an industry application. And I think these two models are worth study and worth detailed study. I understand that there is a somewhat similar model to the engineering research centers here in Korea, but that the Industry University Cooperative Research Centers is a model that has not yet been well established here. And I think in those models, the government serves really as the facilitator between the university and the industry, with industry providing nearly all the research support and government providing some administrative support and universities providing the talent and help in defining the research direction. That model, as well as the ERC model, has a proven track record of producing innovations that find their way directly into industry, as well as spawning new industries, as well as creating students who go on to industry and are able to excel quickly. The emphasis in the Industry University Cooperative Centers on applied research and applied problem solving for industry problems helps students understand and helps faculty understand quickly where industry is going and how to direct their research and resources. In the engineering research model, the emphasis is on engineered systems rather than on small particular problems. And it's this systems focus that produces graduates that tend to go on to industry and move ahead very quickly. Again, in this instance, industry plays a role, but not the major role. They're more there for advice and consultation on the system, but universities have to show that what they're developing does have some impact, will have some impact on industry in the end. And in that case, there's been numerous examples of centers going off and producing new industry, new innovations, and transforming industries. So I suggest that those are two models in which to look at university cooperation with industry.
Thank you, Professor Gabriel. I think your remark is very helpful for us, and I see that the presidents of prominent universities in Korea has listened to your, I think, remarks, and it may be very helpful for their operation. And I mentioned about this business and workplace attitude, and Professor Kokan stressed this, emphasized this importance of overcoming adversarial labor relations. So If time runs out, or Professor Kokhan or Professor Lee, do you want to touch upon this labor management relations? Okay, yeah. Very briefly, please. Yeah. Okay.
I will be very brief, but if there have been studies done in OECD countries, largely European and North American countries, and the evidence is very clear. The countries that have grown the most and that have improved their standards of living are ones that have high levels of unionization and cooperative relationships. At the moment, we see this playing out most effectively in countries like Denmark and the Netherlands and some other Northern European countries. You can't have one without the other. If you're going to have freedom of association, which is so central to our democratic values in our countries and basic human rights, then we have to do it in a way that fits the modern economy. We have to have cooperative relationships. That doesn't mean that labor and management always agree. It means we have strong institutions for helping them to work through their areas of disagreement, to resolve conflicts, strong mediation processes, good training of labor leaders so that they can contribute and add value, wage structures promoted at the national level that link productivity growth, improvements in operating performance, and improvements in wages. These are the kinds of steps that I think are required, pragmatic steps to develop a cooperative labor management relationship. Without that, we will have the kinds of conflicts that Professor Smith mentioned are so destructive in our societies, and we can't be innovative and creative when we are fighting with each other. So that's, there's empirical evidence, and I think a lot of evidence that we can build these institutional processes in a constructive way.
Yeah. So, 넘어갈까요?
언급할까요?
Yeah.
지금 우리나라의 경우에 있어서 비즈니스 레벨에서의 그 인적 자원 개발에 비즈니스가 어떤 역할을 해야 될 것인가 하는 부분은 펌 레벨하고 내셔널 앤드 리저널 레벨로 나누어서 우리가 생각을 해볼 수가 있을 겁니다. 우선 펌 레벨에서 우리나라가 지식기반 경제로 가는데 가장 중요한 것은 그 시그널을 노동시장의 수요자인 기업이 노동시장의 공급자인 대학에 시그널을 정확하게 보내주라 하는 것입니다. 즉 말하자면 지식 근로자가 필요하다면은 그 스크리닝 디바이스에서, 그러니까 선별 장치, 사람을 뽑는 기준을, 사람을 뽑을 때에 이 지식 근로자를 선별할 수 있는 방법으로 뽑으라 하는 것입니다. 그러면은 대학은 지식 근로자를 길러내기 위해서 다각적인 노력을 기울일 것입니다. 그런데 지금 우리나라 기업들이 대학에 잘못된 시그널을 보내고 있습니다. 그래서 토익 점수와 또는 학교의 성적으로 가지고 뽑기 때문에 학교의 성적은 끊임없이 인플레이션이 이루어지고 그래서 그 양질의 인재의 육성이 지금 안 되고 있는 상태에 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 이것은 이 기업이 우리가 대학에 대해서 기업에 적합한 인재를 못 길러준다고 불평을 하지만 이것의 상당 부분의 책임은 기업이 있음을 알아야 합니다. 기업이 노동시장에서 수요자로서 공급자에게 잘못된 시그널을 계속 보내고 있다 하는 것에 우리가 주의를 해야 합니다. 그리고 노사협력을 우리가 강조하지만 우리가 실질적으로 미국에서 계속 이야기하고 있듯이 공과대학에 다니는 학생이 한 학기나 두 학기 정도의 현장에 가서 현장 실습을 계속 하는 프로그램을 다양하게 가지고 있습니다. 그런데 우리나라 기업들은 대학에서 인턴십을 보내면은 거의 이게 잡일을 시키는 것으로서 처리를 합니다. 그렇기 때문에 실질적인 인턴십이 안 됩니다. 그래서 이게 양질의 그 인재를 길러내는 시스템이 안 됩니다. 이런 측면에서 기업이 이렇게 하면 그 잘못된 인재가 기업에 들어와서 기업의 경쟁력을 떨어뜨린다는, 그것이 부메랑이 된다는 사실을 기업은 인식하고 있어야 합니다. 그 다음에 두 번째, 내셔널 앤드 리저널 레벨에 있어서의 비즈니스 서클 쪽에서의 역할이 무엇인가 하는 것입니다. 그것은 하이스킬 이퀴리브리엄으로 이 국가를 가져가야 되겠다 하는 데 대해서 기업이 강력한 의지를 가지고 있어야 합니다. 우리나라가 잘못하면 로스킬 이퀴리브리엄으로 빠질 위험성이 있습니다. 이것은 왜 그러냐면은 우리나라 노동력의 약 반수 이상이 비정규직 내지 그 직업훈련이라든지 직업능력 개발의 사각지대에 지금 놓여 있습니다. 이것을 방치하면은 우리가 생산 라인에 있어서의 생산성 향상을 가져올 수가 없습니다. 따라서 이 비즈니스 리더들이 노조의 리더들과 손을 잡고 정부와 협력을 해서 이게 전체적으로 하이스킬 이퀴리브리엄으로 이 나라를 가져갈 수 있는 방법을 다각적으로 연구하고 실행해내는 작업이 지금 대단히 중요한 과정입니다. 그 구체적인 실행 방법으로서는 예를 들어서 섹터 카운슬 같은 것을 유효하게 실효성 있게 운영을 하라는 것입니다. 예를 들어서 어떠한 산업별 섹터 카운슬 또는 직종별 섹터 카운슬을 운영을 하면 거기에는 비정규직이라든지 중소기업이라든지 이런 사각지대에 놓여 있는 사람들도 거기에서 교육과 훈련을 받으면 됩니다. 그리고 이 교육과 훈련, 재직자의 직업능력 개발을 기업이 단독으로 하겠다는 생각을 버려야 합니다. 대학과 전문대학과 긴밀하게 손잡고 재직자의 직업능력을 지속적으로 개발하고자 하는 진정한 의미에서의 산학 파트너십의 형성이 필요하다는 점을 우리의 지도자들이 확실하게 인식을 하고 있어야 한다 하는 것입니다. 우리가 스스로 자문해야 될 것은 우리나라에서 많은 분들이 인적 자원 개발의 중요성을 강조하지만 과연 기업의 CEO들이 인적 자원의 개발에 대해서 어느 정도 관심을 갖고 투자를 하고 있는가를 반문해 봐야 하는 것입니다. 우리가 대학에 있어서의 질식 근로자의 양성을 강조하지만은 대학의 총장이나 대학의 교수님들이 지식 근로자의 개념, 지식 기반 경제가 필요한 인재에 대해서 산업 경제의 패러다임과 다르다는 것에 대해서 얼마나 확실한 인식을 갖고 패러다임 전환을 시도하고 있는가 하는 것에 대한 진지한 고뇌와 고민이 필요하다 하는 생각입니다. 예, 감사합니다.
Thank you, Professor Lee. Well, the third key player is government, and actually, particularly today, we haven't heard much about this government role. And Professor Kokkan, I heard your excellent speech, but you haven't touched much about this government initiative. What should the government do to improve this human resource development?
Thank you. I believe there's no substitute for a very active government policy in promoting education, lifelong learning, economic and human resource development. To go back to the study I mentioned a minute ago about labor management relations, in the OECD countries, the countries that invest most in active labor market policies to move people from one job to another, to provide training and development, and that have flexibility in their organizational policies so that they don't require people or organizations to hold on to people that they don't need, are the ones that are doing well. It's not enough to do what the international finance institutions like the IMF and maybe some other macroeconomic advisors have traditionally suggested. Just get flexible labor market policies, just reduce the rigidities in laying people off. Only when that's combined with a very active education, continuing development process, allowing people to find new jobs that are able to provide good payment and good development opportunities, are we likely to see this virtuous cycle move forward. So I believe there's no substitute for that. But let me add two other very quick points. We must, as Professor Lee mentioned, go beyond the macro level and begin to put resources back at the sectoral and at the regional economic development level by bringing these various groups together. Too often, government policymakers who worry about macroeconomic policy are not coordinated with the labor ministry or the educational ministry or the other agencies that worry about the more micro development kinds of issues. we need to bring coordination to our government policy making processes and to the agencies so that the macroeconomic policymakers are just as concerned with these issues and are putting resources there, and so that those from the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Labor, the vocational educational institutes, the sponsors of this Congress and this conference are playing a key role at the macro level. And then finally, what is the role of government? Most importantly, beyond providing resources, thinking hard, linking our macroeconomic and our regional development, government has to be a catalyst for innovation, has to be the institution that brings the various groups together, that continues to promote this common vision and keeps this dialogue going. To me, leadership at the national level is as important on these issues as are the specific policies. Today, we lack the kind of leadership that I believe we need in many of our national governments. I'm not speaking now about Korea. You make those decisions here. But we have seen in the United States that not just and this is not just a statement of our current administration, for too long we have not had articulate leadership, committed leadership to working on these issues. That's what we need more than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kokan. The Secretariat asked me to finish it by 11:40. It's already past that, but nevertheless, I want to continue the discussion on two very important issues. One is lifelong learning, and the other is women labor participation. So I first want to invite Professor Gabriele talk about the points on lifelong learning, and then Dr. Smith, I think, continue on that. Please.
I'm not an economist. I'm an engineering professor, so I'm going to speak from the standpoint of lifelong learning as a teacher. And I think this gets to the very heart of the fundamental kind of thing that needs to be in our educational process, of how we teach our students and how we instill in them this love of lifelong learning. We often, as faculty, say that this is what we want to do, but we're often not sure how to do it. And I think that what it requires is a new model of teaching, a new model of engagement. We've talked about that before, where we, from the very beginning, allow the students more flexibility and more opportunity to take responsibility for their learning, and that we recognize that learning occurs in many different ways, more than just the transfer from the person who has the knowledge to the person who doesn't. There are many ways that students can learn and young people learn nowadays, and we see that as our society is changing with new information technology, so are the modes of learning that our young people are experiencing, that we have not yet really as teachers or as adults yet really fully recognized. And so I think there's an opportunity to rethink at the very fundamental level of lifelong learning, of how we go about recognizing and teaching in a different way. It does require a culture change for sure, and I think that if we are able to make that change, we will instill an excitement in young people from the very beginning for knowledge and for acquiring it. So I think there are other folks on the panel that are better equipped to answer the larger issues of how government can play a role in that. But I think from the standpoint of a teacher, I can say that I think we need to recognize new ways of teaching and new ways of creating excitement than we have so far.
Dr. Smith?
Thank you. Let me just say, and I'll use this as an extension of the comments about putting learning first that I and several other panelists have made. We need to look at lifelong learning, what I would say, from the inside out, not from the outside in. And what I mean by that is think about the learner. Now, what do we know? We know through research, and I won't give you the citations now, when an adult or a child starts out to learn something on their own, there is a cycle they go through. This is regardless of which continent they live on. It is regardless of their income, their gender, anything. There is a set of steps that people do naturally, just the way the law of physics has water flowing downhill. We should understand that cycle of learning, the incidents in which it happens, and there's no reason why we can't organize learning around the natural rhythm, obviously with adaptations, but the natural rhythm that people use. The second point is that what they don't do on their own, which becomes the point of what can the state or a school or a university do about it, is that they don't learn necessarily how to reflect. Reflection for me is my word for how you separate out what you have learned and how you have changed from the broad mass of your experience. So your experience is like a full glass of water, but what you have learned is what settles to the bottom. And being able to, through reflection, if you train in learning how to analyze your experiences and reflect on them, then you have the essential ingredient to be a lifelong learner, and no one can ever take it away from you. We've had, in my life, I've had a number of experiences in this, but it is, this is simple to see once you see the research, and then what is important is to build the policies in the workplace and in learning and in education institutions at the government level around the 2 or 3 core things that matter, so that learning for each individual can be seen, reflected, analyzed, and have a value assigned to it by the larger society where it deserves that kind of value.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Well, I see many female participants among the audience, and it is interesting to find that at the opening session, Dr. Fukuyama, I think, remarked about the importance of women participation, and then at the closing address, Dr. Kokkan also mentioned this. So maybe in this knowledge-based economy, the role of women will be a crucial role. So can Dr. Kokkan, could you, I think, summarize that what is the point related with this issue?
Well, I believe there are 2 critical things that we need to keep in mind in making sure that we fully utilize women in our societies. In the United States, we have found that just bringing more diversity into organizations doesn't necessarily lead to higher levels of performance, creativity, innovativeness, and productivity. It's how we manage that diversity that matters. What we have learned is there are 2 things that are critical to realizing benefits from diversity: more women or more minorities or people from different cultures. The first is that we have to design our work systems so that people can communicate, people can learn from each other, and that people are able to recognize different styles and be able to solve problems together. Those things that make for high-performance work systems elsewhere are just as important, in fact, more important. Because if we bring more women or more diverse people together and we don't work on collaboration, we are going to get more conflict and breakdowns in communication and missed expectations, and we may get lower performance for a while. That's number 1. Number 2 is there's no substitute for having role models in organization. More women in positions where they are in leadership positions to help change the culture of the organization and the culture of higher level positions. We have seen where women are in higher level positions, they serve in ways that encourage more women to succeed at lower levels and to move up. So we have to break those barriers, and sometimes that takes positive actions, strong actions, visible actions by putting more women in leadership positions and allowing them to then bring more women along at lower levels. The final thing that I would emphasize is that this is not an individual problem. We are not going to make progress if we leave it up to just every individual woman to try to solve this. What we have seen in organizations that have been most successful in integrating and utilizing and maintaining women in positions of leadership is there are strong networks. They work together to support each other in a positive way. They provide mutual support, and they provide a mechanism for higher level management to learn how to incorporate women into management and how to address their specific family, workforce, community needs and learning and management styles. So building those networks, providing mutual support, supporting each other is absolutely critical if this generation of women is going to make a significant leap forward.
Thank you, Dr. Kokan. I think we have covered more or less some core elements of human resource development. I think it's time to wrap up the discussion session. And since all the participants had made a very brief, good summarizing point, so I don't want to attempt to summarizing the discussion again. So I just want to ask our audience to give a big applause to the panelists. Thank you very much.